Good evening, everyone. I'm audible. Okay. I'll just share the screen. Is screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just a quick reminder of the previous class. So we discussed damnum sign injuria, what is torts. We also discussed injuria sign damnum. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what is damnum sign injuria, class? Yes, what is damnum sign injuria, Shikha? Komal, Prarthi.
So it is when a damage is done, but there is like a damage without legal injury, and then there is no claim for compensation.
Right. So what is injury?
It's a violation of a legal right.
And what is damage?
It's compensation. No, physical or monetary damage that leads to compensation.
Right, very right. Okay, and what is injurious and damnum? What is injurious and damnum class? Injurious and damnum means injury without damage. So in this situation, legal right is violated. Very good, Komal. Without causing any damage, not necessarily may or may not cause damage, right? But the violation of legal right has taken place, and that is the reason why one can claim compensation. Fine. Now, if we discuss certain cases as well in injurious and damnum sign injury, did we? Yes or no, class? Okay. So what are the cases of injurious and damnum, Komal? Voter. ठीक है. HB versus White is the name of the case. ठीक है. No issues. Okay. Now, so the other one is of damnum sign injuria, जहां पर हमने डिस्कस किया था कि मान के चलिए मैं सामने एक और कोचिंग क्लास खोल दूं and some of the students shift from this coaching to my coaching, right? Then will it be a case of tort? The answer is a no, right? How do you define law of torts? How do you define law of torts?
So, like, are you asking the definition of tort?
Yes, I'm asking the definition of torts.
It's a civil wrong which is caused due to the omission or act for which unliquidated damages are awarded.
What are unliquidated damages, Prarthi?
They are the damages which are not fixed. They vary. Yeah.
And why the damage is not fixed in torts?
Because their consequences may be different.
Very right. Fine. But because the level of injury may vary, or rather the level of damage may vary. Now, so we also started with general defenses in the previous class, as far as I remember, right?
Yes, sir.
So we discussed voluntary non-fit injuria.
Yes.
So what is voluntary non-fit injuria?
It's the voluntary taking of any risk.
1 second, just wait, Prarthi. Everyone write down in the chat box, because only one person is speaking and the rest of the others are just listening. So I want everyone to participate. Apart from Prarthi, everyone else too should write. Where are you, Shikha? It's been already 10 minutes. मेरी वॉइस सबको आ रही है, सिर्फ आप ही को नहीं आ रही है. Komal, my question is, what do you understand by a voluntary non-fit injuria? How do you explain it? Explain the general defense of voluntary non-fit injuria. Now you heard me, Shikha? Explain it in a much comprehensive manner. That what you guys have written, both Prarthi and Komal, it is a literal translation of the defense. Yes. पलक, आप भी आंसर नहीं कर रहे हो बेटा. Very right, Komal, that the subject himself knows about the risk. Very right. What kind of risk? Okay. But cursor move हो रहा है. How is it possible, Shikha, that you are not able to hear me? Everyone else is able to hear me. Very right. Very right, Prarthi and Komal both. Fine. So as you have like correctly put it, voluntary non-fit injury is a general defense which would convert a tort into a no tort, which basically means that if you fall in any of these categories, then you will get the defense. The main purpose of providing voluntary non-fit injuria as a defense is that if a person knows about the risk and still he takes it, then in that situation, he cannot claim compensation if he has suffered certain injuries. Why? The reason being simple. Reason being simple that if you knew about the consequences and still you voluntarily undertook the same, then it is a clear case of voluntary non-fit injury, and then in such a situation, a person would not be liable or is not entitled to claim compensation. Now, also, We discussed about act of God as well. No, I don't think so. We discussed act of God. Now, what is an exception to the rule of voluntary non-fit injuria? Yes, class. Exception क्या है? I remember we discussed exception as well. Rescue, very good. So, rescue case जो है, that is an exception. So, suppose if you had gone to save someone, और मान के चलिए आप उसको बचाते वक्त अगर आपको कुछ इंजरी हो जाती है, तो he can very well claim compensation. One cannot say कि भैया ये तो आप तो खुद मुझे बचाने आए थे, अब इसमें इंजरी होगी तो इसमें मेरी क्या गलती? नो. अगर किसी को बचाते हुए if you suffer certain injuries, then in that situation a person would be liable then comes the second defense, which is act of God or vis major. Now, what is an act of God? An act of God is a situation which is beyond human control. That means humans do not have any control over such a situation. So suppose you were in Goa and suddenly एक सुनामी आती है और इस सुनामी में आपको कुछ नुकसान हो जाता है. For example, you suffer certain injuries. Can you claim any compensation from the hotel owner or from anyone जहां पर आप रुके हुए थे? The answer is a no. Why? Because if due to natural disaster or disasters which are beyond human control, a damage is caused, then the person would not be liable. Another example of this could be, suppose you are living in a house और भूकंप आता है और बिल्डिंग गिर जाती है. Can you claim compensation from the builder? Yes, class. You can claim compensation, Shikha. That is what you're saying.
Yes, sir.
Why?
Sir,
Not audible, Shikha. Okay. The answer is a no. Why? Because the defense of act of God would be directly available, which is you have suffered certain injuries as a result of natural disaster or as a result of the earthquake. Now, let me change the situation a bit. Suppose there is an earthquake there is an earthquake, and in this situation, and only your building collapses and rest of the other building remain remain standing, then in that situation, can you claim compensation? Let me see the answers. Okay, why yes Prarthi and why no Komal? I want to know the reasons of both of you. Something made your building weak for only it collapsed and none other did. Okay. What about you, Komal? No, because earthquake is happened. That is important, maybe. Why a question mark, Shikha? Okay. The answer is simple. Only your building collapsed and none of the other building collapsed. So basically means that your building was weak. So there can be a fault in your building, and that is the reason why your building collapsed. So in that situation, you may claim compensation. Now, suppose another situation. There is a very old clock tower in your city. Now what happens is a clock tower है बहुत ही पुराना dilapidated condition में है. An earthquake comes and the clock tower collapses. The intensity of the earthquake was very weak, 1 Richter scale U में से, but still the clock tower collapsed. The clock tower was maintained by the government, and in such a situation, can you claim compensation if you suffered certain injuries or some damage from the government in this situation? Yes, very right. The answer is yes. Why? Again, the same, the whole thing, the building wala same जो logic है, that would be applicable, that will be applicable rather to this situation as well. Right. Now, suppose can a forest fire be considered as an act of God? Okay. Now, here is a caution to all of you. A forest fire can be considered as an act of God if it goes beyond such proportion that it becomes uncontrollable by humans. For example, if you guys remember, like perhaps a year or 2 years ago, there was huge forest fire in Australia, which continued for several days. Those are the cases which can be covered under act of God in the case of forest fire. Now, another situation is, can COVID can be considered as an act of God? Huh? Can COVID be considered as an act of God? Yes, no, yes, no. Okay. Yes, no, no. Chika says no. Prati says no. Komal says yes. Okay. Let's hear the reasons from each one of you. Because it was produced by human beings themselves. Well, there are no proof of it. There are no proofs of it. It is controllable. Okay. पहली बात तो गॉड जैसी कोई चीज लॉ बिलीव नहीं करता है. So when I'm saying act of God, it is basically it basically means a situation which is beyond human control. It's not related to a thing कि ये तो भगवान ने किया होगा. No. Now, as far as COVID is concerned, COVID was considered उस टाइम पर जब ये हुआ था as an act of God, in the sense कि अगर उस सिचुएशन में कुछ डैमेजेस होते तो कॉम्पनसेशन नहीं मिलता, डिफेंस मिल जाता. ठीक है. नाउ फॉर एग्जाम्पल, किसी को कोविड हो गया और वो बाहर चला गया, वो किसी से टच हुआ, उसको भी कोविड हो रहा था. दैट इज हाउ इट वाज स्प्रेडिंग. व्हाट इज what is also interesting to note is, if you remember, a lockdown was announced in India as a result of the COVID. Why? Because there was no cure for it. ऐसा तो है नहीं कि COVID has ceased to exist and people are not having COVID anymore. People are still having COVID, but now things are going very normally. The reason being simple. That now there is a cure and hence it is controllable now. At some point of time when it initially started, it was uncontrollable, right? And that is the reason why it can be considered as an act of God, and that is the reason why many situations, कई सारे cases हुए जहाँ पे people were not able to pay the rent, people were not able to pay the money on time. All the situations were covered in COVID. Am I clear with act of God? Now, the third defense is plaintiff the wrongdoer. Plaintiff the wrongdoer, which basically means that plaintiff himself is responsible for the harm that he has suffered. Plaintiff कौन होता है?
The one जिसका legal right violate हुआ है.
Right. The person whose legal right is violated. So if a person himself is responsible for violation of his own legal right, then can he blame someone else? The answer is a clear no. So that is the reason why plaintiff the wrongdoer. So if plaintiff's act has caused damage to himself, then he cannot claim compensation. Let's take a very simple example. You were crossing the road when the signal was green. A car which was running in the right direction, running within the reasonable speed, ends up hitting you. You suffer some injuries. Can you claim compensation from the car wala? The answer is a clear no. Why? Because you yourself is responsible for the damage that you have suffered. Now, what is important to understand here is that it is different from voluntary non-fit injuria. How is it different from voluntary non-fit injuria class? Do they sound similar? Do they look similar? No, the plaintiff is aware of the risk, Prarthi, in VNFI. That is voluntary taking of risks. शिखा सारे ही डिफेंसेस हैं जो हम पढ़ रहे हैं अभी। नाउ the answer is simple. In voluntary non-fit injury, a person voluntarily undertakes the risk. That means he's aware of the risk that he is undertaking. But in plaintiff, the wrongdoer, had there been no fault of the plaintiff, he would have not suffered any damage. So the plaintiff himself is at the wrong place firstly. Right? So that is what the difference between plaintiff, the wrongdoer, and voluntary non-fit injury is. Next one is accident or misfortune. Can I explain 1 and 2 again? क्या समझ नहीं आया शिखा? वॉलंटरी नॉन फिट इंजूरी क्या है शिखा? Hmm. No, this is seriously because I really don't understand that you have been doing this for the past 2 classes, because it just breaks the whole. Next time, whenever you're attending my class, make sure that you have a proper connectivity and you are not connected to 2 devices at the same time. Voluntary non-fit injury is voluntary taking of risk, which basically means a person voluntarily undertakes the risk despite being aware the risk involved. Now, a person can only be held, or a person can only give consent to a situation to which he or she is aware. Now, so जो वॉलेंटरीली आप रिस्क ले रहे हैं, एग्जाम्पल बीइंग आप क्रिकेट मैच देखने गए, वहां पे एक बैट्समैन ने शॉट मारा, बॉल आपको आगे लगी, आप कॉम्पनसेशन क्लेम नहीं कर सकते. व्हाई? बिकॉज यू योरसेल्फ न्यू दैट इफ यू आर गोइंग टू वॉच अ क्रिकेट मैच, दीज थिंग्स कैन हैपन. So in that situation, you have voluntarily undertaken that risk. ये clear है शिखा? Voluntary non-fit injury है. Act of God, vis major. Second is act of God or vis major. Act of God are situations which are beyond human control. Now, which are beyond human control. This would include natural disasters such as flood, earthquake, etc. So if you suffer certain harm as a result of these situations, तो इस situation में फिर से आप compensation claim नहीं कर सकते. It would be a complete defense. Why? Because the damage that has been caused to you is because of a natural disaster. Is it clear now? Third one is plaintiff, the wrongdoer. अगर plaintiff कौन होता है शिखा? Yes, Shikha, who is a plaintiff? Now, so plaintiff is the person whose legal right has been violated. So in this situation, the damage that has been caused to the plaintiff is due to his own wrongdoing, and that is the reason why he cannot claim any compensation, and that is the reason why it's a general defense that plaintiff the wrongdoer. That means plaintiff ने अगर खुद को ही नुकसान पहुंचा दिया खुद की गलती की वजह से ही, तो फिर उस सिचुएशन में क्या होगा? plaintiff the wrongdoer. अनदर एग्जाम्पल ऑफ प्लेंटिफ द रॉन्ग डूअर क्या हो सकता है? मान के चलिए एक बस है जो चल रही है और चलते चलते आप उसमें चढ़ने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं और उस वजह से आपकी चोट लग जाती है. कैन द बस वाला भी हेल्ड गिल्टी? If there is no fault of the bus wala, the answer is a clear no. And then in that situation, you cannot claim any compensation. Next one is accident or misfortune. Accident or misfortune means a case where despite taking reasonable care, the harm could not be prevented. Now, suppose you were driving your car on a highway or on a road within the speed limits, and suddenly a coconut tree falls right in front of your car, and in order to prevent it, you press the brake, और उस वजह से क्या हुआ कि your car stalled a bit and it ended up hitting the nearby car. Will you be held guilty for this? Can the person whose car has suffered, or rather who has suffered certain injuries, can he claim compensation from you? Yes, class. Right. So you cannot claim compensation because you did whatever you could have done in order to prevent the harm. So you cannot claim any compensation. नेचुरल फॉल्ट भी तो था नहीं. आप प्रॉब्लम को समझ नहीं पा रहे हो शिखा. पेड़ गिरा, उसको से बचने के लिए आपने गाड़ी के ब्रेक दबाए, जिसकी वजह से आपकी गाड़ी थोड़ा सा स्वर्ल हुई, और स्वर्ल होके जो पड़ोस में जो गाड़ी थी उससे जाके भिड़ गई. The question is not about your car. The question is about the car which you ended up hitting. Is my example clear, Komal? Is it clear to you, Shikha? नहीं होगा क्लेम. डिफेंस मिलेगा ना एक्सीडेंट मिसफॉर्च्यून का. नेक्स्ट डिफेंस इज नेसेसिटी. Next defense is necessity. Now, necessity knows no harm. Why do I say that? Suppose if Komal, despite taking reasonable care, if something could not be prevented, then it is a case of accident. So, suppose you suddenly pull the brakes, as a result of which you ended up hitting someone. You took all the precautions, but it was the misfortune of the other person to get injured. Now is it clear? Now, so he cannot claim compensation. Yes, he cannot claim compensation because ऐसे समझो ना, पेड़ गिरा, आपने उस पेड़ से बचने के लिए ब्रेक्स लगाए और आपकी गाड़ी जो थी वो थोड़ा ब्रेक लगाए जल्दी में, तो डेफिनेट सी बात है थोड़ा सा घूमेगी और वो घूम के जो पड़ोस में कार थी या पड़ोस में जो इंसान था उसके जाके लग गया. कैन ही क्लेम कॉम्पनसेशन फ्रॉम यू? द आंसर इज नो. व्हाई? बिकॉज इट वाज एन एक्सीडेंट. Then comes necessity. What is necessity? Necessity knows no harm. Necessity knows no harm. Now, the defense of necessity says that in order to prevent a bigger harm, if you cause a smaller harm, and causing the smaller harm was the only option which was available to you, then in that situation, you can cause smaller harm. Am I clear? Then in that situation, it would be a complete defense. Now, this is a clear case of Titanic, for example. Let's take a case of Titanic. Suppose there is a huge ship carrying 500 people. Now suddenly it sees an iceberg in front of, suddenly there is an iceberg in front of the ship. Now there are only two options that are available to the captain of the ship. Either it goes straight. If it goes straight, then it will meet with the iceberg, and that would ultimately lead to the death of 500 people who are on board the ship. But there is another way, which is if it turns the ship towards right. But if it turns the ship, but if the captain of the ship turns the ship towards the right, then there is a small ship or a small boat carrying 5 people, and they would be killed. Now, in order to save 500 people, suppose the ship turns towards right and ends up killing those 5 people, but ends up saving 500 people on the ship. Have they committed any tort? Is the question clear? No tort, no tort. Okay. Why Prarthi and Komal? Right. So they prevented a major harm by doing a minor harm, very rightly put. Now, you can commit a minor harm in order to prevent a bigger harm, but the only situation where you can do so is when there is no other alternative possible, right? When there is no other alternative possible, but only to commit a smaller harm. Then in that situation, you can do the smaller harm in order to prevent a bigger harm. Let's take another situation. Suppose एक बिल्डिंग में आग लग गई है. Now बिल्डिंग में आग लग गई है, staircase में भी आग लग गई है. A 4-year-old boy is inside the building. Now you entered inside the building in order to save him. अब आप सीढ़ियों से नीचे जा नहीं सकते because वहां पर आग है. The only option that you're left with is to throw the boy from the 4th floor of the building towards the ground. You throw the boy. The boy survives, but ends up breaking his leg. Can the boy claim compensation from you? Yes, class. Okay, how would you explain this? Yes, come on the mic and explain that why the boy cannot claim.
So can I?
Yeah.
So like if you hadn't done that, then maybe he could have died in the fire. That would be a greater harm to him than a harm an injury to his leg. So you did what you did to save him, to protect him.
Okay. Yes, anyone else?
Also, sir, like there was no other thing that you could have done.
Right. Because I clearly stated in the question that the staircase were on fire and there was no other way to save him except to throw him from the building. Right. So definite सी बात है कि उस सिचुएशन में you cannot claim any compensation, and that is the reason why you would get the defense of necessity.
So,
Yeah.
so can this be the exception in voluntary non-fit injury as well?
No, there is a difference. In voluntary non-fit injuria, the person who consented for the rescue or consented for the risk suffered the injuries, right?
Yes, sir.
But in this case, the person who consented for the risk has not suffered the injuries.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Understood?
Yeah.
Anyone else who not understood this? भाई बच्चे का तो कंसेंट लिया ही नहीं ना आपने, और बच्चे का कंसेंट वैसे भी मैटर नहीं करता, राइट? Am I clear? Now let's take another situation. Suppose एक घर में आग लग गई है. Now the only way out to reach to that particular building, sorry, the only way for the fire brigade to reach to that particular building is by breaking a certain portion of Mr. X's house, and there is no other way out, and they end up demolishing some portion of Mr. X's house in order to ensure that the fire brigade reaches to the building and douse the fire. Now, what do you say? Can this be considered as a case of necessity?
So could you repeat?
Okay, the question is simple. The question is that suppose there is a building which has caught fire. Let's assume it's a mall, right? And the only way to reach for the fire brigade to the mall to douse the fire is by breaking certain portion of Mr. X's house. They decide to break certain portion of the Mr. X's house so as to reach to the building that was blazing. Now, will you get the defense of necessity? Yes, class. Is the question clear? So yeah, Komal, you are saying that you can claim compensation or you cannot claim compensation. Prarthi?
Sir, I'm a bit unsure because like there was no other possible way to put out the fire. So I guess that the defense should be provided. But again, like Mr. X had no connection to the fire, whatever whatsoever.
So how is it relevant? In the ship वाला example also, the ship जिसको बाद में हमने मतलब जो छोटी ship थी उसमें भी तो कोई relation नहीं था उनका.
Yes, sir. So then yes, maybe it would be provided, the defense.
Okay. The answer is yes, you can claim the defense of necessity. The reason being that there was no other alternative that was possible. Am I clear? Let's take another situation, class. एक सिचुएशन लेते हैं. चार एक्सप्लोरर्स हैं, ठीक है. There are 4 explorers जिनका काम है नई नई जगह जाके सी फेयरिंग करना, बेसिकली क्या कहते हैं कि समुद्र के थ्रू जाना एंड टू फाइंड न्यू प्लेसेस वेयर population can live. Now, 3 of them are married, have families. There is one person who is an 18-year-old boy who does not have a family because he is an orphan. It is his first voyage. He also accompanies them. The other 3 are seasoned professionals, experienced professionals. Now what happens is, they go on the exploration, and what happens is suddenly some problem happens in their ship, as a result of which वो एक रेस्क्यू बोट पर आ गए, छोटी वाली. उनके पास अब क्या हुआ, जो खाने का सामान था, that also got finished. They were left with no food, they were left with no water, and they were in a completely deserted part of the sea where they could not seek any help coming. Now this young boy, who was an 18-year-old boy, and जिसकी उसकी ये पहली voyage थी, so what he did, because he could not bear the thrust, he ended up drinking some seawater. Now, as you all know that seawater is salty, so it causes more thirst. And ultimately it caused more thirst, and he was almost on the verge of death. Now, these 3 people decide that if we kill him, because he is almost on the verge of dying, so if we kill him and if we eat him, then we can survive. So at the cost of 1 person, 3 people can survive. Right? Now, do you think, so these people killed this young boy and eat him. Now, do you think these people should be given the defense of necessity, or they have committed a crime, tort, whatever? Is the question clear? Yes, anyone caring to explain their reasons, feel free to have opinion. That's not an issue. Okay, so now the answer is a clear case which can fall in two categories. On one situation, it can fall under the defense of necessity, कि भाई उनके पास कोई और ऑप्शन बचा ही नहीं था उसको मारने के अलावा, right? The second is that of it is a crime and it is not a necessity. Why? Because they decided to take someone's life in order to defend one's own life. Can that be the case in necessity? Secondly, was no other alternative that was available? क्या कोई और alternative नहीं था? Yes, class. What do you think? क्या कोई और option नहीं था उनके पास? मैंने कहा कि कोई ऑल्टरनेटिव नहीं है, मैंने ये नहीं कहा, मैंने कहा कि उनको भूख लगी, उन्होंने खा लिया, उनके पास कुछ खाने को नहीं बचा था. Now, the answer is not a clear-cut answer to this question, and this would be taught to you also in the class when you'll go to the law school. Now, the answer, it can be considered as necessity अगर उसको हम इस तरीके से देखें कि भाई उनके पास कुछ और ऑप्शन नहीं बचा था, बट स्टिल ये वहां तक एक्सटेंड नहीं करता कि आप किसी की जान ले लें. नेसेसिटी में आप सेल्फ डिफेंस में जान ले सकते हैं, दैट्स अ डिफरेंट केस, बट नेसेसिटी में आप जान ले लें इन ऑर्डर टू प्रिवेंट, इन ऑर्डर जस्ट टू सेव योरसेल्फ, दैट इज रॉन्ग. हाँ, लेकिन जो मैंने आपको टाइटैनिक वाला एग्जांपल दिया था कि 500 को बचाने के लिए आप 5 की जान ले लें, दैट इज फाइन, बट आप ये सोच लें कि भाई हम इसको मार के अपने आप को बचा लें, वो क्या है, दैट इज प्योरली अ किलिंग. एंड समुद्र में है, दे कुड हैव eaten something else, perhaps maybe a fish. ठीक है, तो इसमें दोनों चीजें पॉसिबल हैं. द ओनली पर्पस ऑफ गिविंग यू दिस एग्जाम्पल वॉज टू मेक यू अंडरस्टैंड दैट sometimes the defense of necessity may not be as straightforward as you may think, right? It has to be and has to be understood from the given fact and circumstances. The example that I gave you is that of a real case which happened in England many centuries ago, perhaps maybe 1 or 2 centuries ago. The court held the seafarers guilty. Why they held the seafarers guilty? Because of one simple reason, that they are not, that there was no necessity, and since you have taken the लाइफ ऑफ समवन इन ऑर्डर टू सेव योरसेल्फ, तो और ये जानबूझ के आपने किया बिना उससे पूछे, इट्स अ क्लियर केस ऑफ मर्डर एंड दे वर हेल्ड गिल्टी। प्रूव भी कैसे करेंगे? प्रूव करना वकीलों का काम है, राइट शिखा? So don't get into that what could be proved and what could not be proved. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Sure, everyone? Fine. So we'll stop here today at necessity. Right? Next class we'll continue with further defenses. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we'll stop here. Thank you, everyone. Take care.